Hello YouTube. I used to have a home in Rosharon, Texas. I moved into a neighborhood that had major problems. It had flooding. There was dumping going on. My neighbors out there, a number of them, would dump beer cans and glass bottles and all manner of other heavy littering along the roads leading into the neighborhood. When I first got there, I made it my goal to clean the area up because it was flooding and the drainage was clogged up with waste. The grass was overgrown all up and down the drainage easement from where my property was located out to the highway where the DOT took over. And the Department of Transportation in Fort Bend County was not taking care of the drainage easement like they were supposed to out there either until I started to write them letters about it. And I started to communicate with the commissioner's office and with the Fort Bend County judge and with the drainage and road and bridge districts. When I got into the neighborhood, you could not see the culverts under the driveways in front of any of the properties because they were filled in with sediment and with trash and high grass. Now what was happening was a number of things, but mostly we had an individual who owned a heavy equipment company, mostly demolitions, construction, moving dirt, moving rock. He owned a fleet of these trucks, these black steel box trucks, and he would power wash on his street, and he would bring dirt in to various lots that he was purchasing throughout the neighborhood. And this person would not put silt fences up, among other things. And when it would rain or flood, which was frequent because the area was inclined towards flooding, the soil and the rock and so forth that he brought in would wash out into the ditches. In addition to that, because it was mostly poor area that paid very little in taxes, according to the county, so I was told. And I won't name anyone here. As far as that, county officials, I talked to several, and they really didn't want to come in and service the area at first until I talked to the county judge's office. That's back when KP George was doing well before the scandals. This guy that came in eventually to work on it came with a team, and they came with a couple of great alls and multiple dump trucks, but it took us until just before 2020, if I remember right, to get them to come in there, and it took them 6 weeks to clear the ditches in the neighborhood. And it equated to about 6 blocks. It was 6 blocks that they had to clear on both sides of the road. The silt was anywhere between 18 and as much as 36 inches deep in some places, depending on where you were in the subdivision. The culverts were not level because some had receded. It had been, according to one of my neighbors, something like 25 years since they came in there to do the ditching work. And I was trying to get them to fix the roads too. Eventually they did turn up to fix the roads, but it wasn't until like 2021 or 2022, somewhere in there. By then I was gone. But I spent the first 18 months there just trying to dig a trench from my house out to where the DOT's drainage easement was. And I spent a lot of time trying to elevate the lot that my house sat on because I was on piers. And there was a real problem with crime in the neighborhood. It was mostly quiet, but there were a number of alcoholics and people out there who were drug addicts who used cocaine and marijuana very heavily, and they would often use those things together. One of my neighbors out there would burn their trash and throw it over their fence into a field, whatever wouldn't burn, which was mostly metal scraps. And the field was right behind this Sacred Heart food pantry that everybody would go to. All around the area, people were very poor. This was almost the lowest income scale population. Most of the people that I had out there for neighbors were very, very poor. And you'd see many of them walking to get back and forth to the La Michoacana and to the gas station or to the liquor store down the street, A&A. Despite the fact that I was very generous to my neighbors across the street, some of them could not be reasoned with. Some of them did not appreciate at all the improvements that I was trying to make, how I was trying to help people. And inadvertently, by calling for all the county service on the roads and the ditches and reporting EPA violations that were going on, some of these people ended up getting taken to court, and they got in legal trouble for clean water violations and for septic management violations. There's supposed to be certain codes. Some of the properties out there were grandfathered in, and because of that, they were exempt from certain environmental codes. But my objective had been to get the county to invest in our neighborhood and to clean it up, because we were flooding. When we would get rain, before they dredged the ditches out, we would get 4 to 5 inches of rain, and the water would have to flow over the driveways and over the street to recede and to exit the neighborhood. There was only one outlet, and eventually we had 3 functional outlets. But for the water to flow out, it had to be above the road, because we had so many culverts. Nearly all the culverts were buried, anywhere between 50 and 100%, and they needed to be cleaned out. And they did come out to clean them out, after several years of waiting and complaining. But I tried so hard to advocate for that community, and my house ended up getting burglarized by my neighbors across the street. And it was at that point that I just said, no, I can't do it anymore. A couple of them came and beat on my car while I was waiting for the police. The police told me they weren't going to make any recovery. It was the Fort Bend sheriff. And some of his deputies were the ones who responded. It was actually 3 separate deputies. My spouse had died, and I was dealing with all these things that I was learning about what happened to her while trying to, clean up that area, picking up trash, and I was having to mow several of my neighbors' lots that were vacant or abandoned. And I had one neighbor in particular. I'm going to call this guy by the name that he went by, not his actual name. He went by Beaver. This guy would come over and ask me for stuff all the time. He was an alcoholic, and he was addicted to cocaine. And I didn't immediately realize that when I met the guy, but everybody kept telling me, even his own family, that he was bad news. Don't pay him anything, don't give him anything. So one day, after I moved out of my house because it was damaged by mold, this guy and possibly his uncle decides to come over and break into the house and steal my water tank while I'm waiting for somebody to help us to mitigate the mold on the property. And he ends up breaking my pipes in my well. He breaks them off in a concrete slab, and he takes my well tank, which is several $100s to replace. And he goes in the house and he takes the toilet out of there. And I'd had a partner out there that I was dating who had given them the real estate lockbox code to be able to go in and take these fixtures. He actually gave them keyed access to just walk right into the front door. I gave them 24 hours to bring everything back, and they didn't do it. And when I called the police, a couple of teenagers over there got confrontation with me because I told, the guy's mother, the guy responsible for the burglary, I said to her, look, I am going to contact law enforcement to report this because I'm not the owner of this property. I'm on a mortgage. The bank owns this property, and I will be held liable for property damage that happens here. And 2 teenagers came over and started beating on my car in the driveway after I turned and jumped in there to lock the door, so I didn't have to deal with confrontational neighbors. It ended up being a back and forth feud. I left. I was staying in transient housing for a couple of months in a nearby city. And I went back to check on the property, and another one of the individuals over there came out of the house. It's a drug dealer that was living over there in that area. And he would come and go from this old lady's house, These are people that I've been good to. I mean, I gave them a van, and a truck, and air conditioning, and heaters for the winter, clothing, food, tools, hand tools and power tools, a lot of different things. So many things, in fact, that I lost track how generous that I was to them and exactly what I had given to them. But it was thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff that I just didn't need anymore. And they had an acute need for transportation. They were laborers, the ones that were over there that were working, and the rest were on Social Security. And it was like a tax shelter for a number of disabled people and elderly people who were sick, and a bunch of delinquent adults that were more like, teenagers and children than grown people. And I kept trying to tell them, look, y'all can't be talking to me or the others in my family the way that you do. Don't be cussing at them, don't be cussing at me when I send somebody over with charity, with food or something like that. Don't be mistreating people or disrespecting us. We're your neighbors, I wouldn't do that to you. Don't do it to me. And the problem was that a bunch of them were on cocaine and alcohol and painkillers, and they were all dealing with these addiction issues and dealing with chronically high unemployment, and they did not want to work. And they're using the grandma's house, the mother's house, as a flop house to go and crash and just tear things up and throw trash on the ground, and then come out and weed eat and mow the lawn and pick up trash once in a while and say, oh, we did our part, this is enough, we don't have to do anything else, we don't need to go to school, don't need to hold a full-time job. And so people were getting picked up for possession and for all manner of different offenses. I mean, stupid stuff. Parking in a handicap space. It's ridiculous. It was just ridiculous. There was, domestic violence going on. That's how it is in a lot of the Latino families, unfortunately. The men abuse alcohol and they get stressed out about various different things, and they're abusive to their wives. And sometimes the women are abusive to the men. And it just got to the point where it poured over and started to affect the community outside their property, and nobody could develop a lot right next door to these people, because they would come over and they would ask you for things. They would ask to borrow things, and then take it to some distant property outside the neighborhood and leave it and hope you forgot that you lent it to him. Happened with my wheelbarrow and a number of other things. And I had to physically go and pick up the things that had been taken because they'd been taken with the intention of stealing them. And I let a lot of things go at first. One of the guys walked across the street, threatened to burglarize my house with my wife and kids inside before she died. If I didn't give him $300, he was drunk, he was using cocaine or something. I reported it to the police. I went back and I told them everything. Like, this is just too much. They forced us out. My house ended up being vacant for 3 years. The grass ended up being more than 12 feet high. They would harass anybody I sent out there to look at the property. And they broke the windows out. They left the place unlivable. In addition to the mold that we were already dealing with from, Hurricane Harvey. And it's just such a mess because I couldn't rely on the local police. I had a Rosenberg cop tell me, fuck your house. Just abandon it. Forget it. Fuck it. All the different stuff you listed off to me, fuck your house. Move on. And I'm like, damn, he's not mincing words. Another person, a local fire chief, told me, the best thing that neighborhood could do is burn. And I'm like, wow, this is really bad. It took me a while, it took me a few years to get in contact with the right people. But I started writing to state government and others who are much higher up, telling them about my concerns and what we were dealing with in that area. And they finally developed something called the Fresno plan that affects that community as well because it's right on the fringes of Fresno. And they got in there with public water and rent-controlled housing to replace all the decrepit and derelict homes that were out there that people were living in or falling down around them. I had neighbors who were living in houses with the walls falling off. I'm not even kidding. This was a ghetto area, very, very poor people who were on Social Security. And a lot of them dealt with addiction and depression, mental health concerns. And I didn't want to cause problems for the people in the neighborhood. I knew that they were struggling and they were suffering, a lot of them. But at the same time, it gets the problem, point where you have the issue with neighbors running around and they're predatory. They're preying on the other neighbors who are poor. They're stealing, and there's violence going on, and burglaries, and violent home invasions, and people get stabbed and shot. That's the stuff that was happening. It was happening out in that area within just a couple of blocks, all within a confined area of about a half mile to a mile or so. And I started to write about everything that was happening out there, trying to get a sheriff's substation built, among other things, because we needed that area to be cleaned up. It needed scrutiny. It needed outside investment, and we weren't getting it. And I was one of the good people, and I got run out with my family and lost, life insurance money for my wife, our 401ks, IRA, life savings, my dad's life insurance settlement from when he got killed by a truck hitting him. All that was tied up in the house. College funds were tied up in the house because we had gone all in to get this property, this home. The market was bad when we bought. There weren't very many homes on the market. And she wanted a traditional single-family home, and I was flexible about what we were going to live in. I regret it now tremendously, moving into that area, because I was very progressive. I thought that if they saw how I was investing in the area, trying to help out and make things better, that the good people that were there would stick up for me, and they would not let predatory neighbors try to encircle us. But that wasn't what happened. The good neighbors stuck back in their own properties, their own homes, and just let my property get ravaged until I told a couple of them what was going on, and they started to call the police and report the things that they were seeing happening out there, because we had this group of people across the street. Not all of them, but about, I want to say, 6 or 7 of them were habitual criminal offenders. And they would turn up out there at that old lady's house where she had a tax shelter on the property, and they would freeload off of her, and they would gamble away their money and drink and do drugs. And it eventually came to the point where a lot of resources got involved without my direct involvement, just because of the description of all the problems that I was sharing about out there that were happening. And they aggressively intervened to remedy some of these things that were happening, some of the things, the conditions that were existing in that place. The public water was something everybody needed, because so many of my neighbors, at least 2 of them, died from cancer-related illnesses, as a comorbidity, and another lady down the street had cancer, and another lady across the street had breast cancer that she had treated, and then it came back. And what was happening was that they were, some of the people were burning toxic trash outside in the yard, and they were dumping motor oil and antifreeze on the ground, and it was contaminating the cesspool next to the home, because they didn't have a septic tank to treat any of this stuff. And even so, if they did, it still would have caused soil contamination, because septic is not designed for dealing with hazardous materials. It's not dealing with automotive liquids, stuff that comes out of your engine and your cooling system. And the guy who was responsible for a lot of that was a career criminal. This individual that I described to you, Beaver, that's what he went by. And he was Latino, and he was all tatted up, and he'd been in and out of jail at least, something like 8 times for stupid stuff. I mean, like, he'd go and he'd just sit in there because he was too poor to afford bond, which I can understand. I'm not criticizing his poverty, but who's going to sit there and park in a handicapped space at the liquor store when they're going in to get beer and they're not a handicapped person? First of all, that's blocking the special needs people who have health conditions where they need access. And secondly, it's just ridiculous. There are other parking spaces, That just speaks volumes to the person's character. And he had vehicles before, and he crashed them, trucks, because he was a drunk driver. He was still driving out there. And I told, local resources, I said, look, we've got a problem out here with drunk drivers, people driving under the influence of cocaine and things like that. Y'all need to get out here, and y'all need to really crack down on this area, because this is a real big problem. And there was so much stuff happening, it was ridiculous. You got that kind of poverty, you got addiction and substance use issues. There's so many complications that come in, especially when they start having children. My God, don't even get me started on that. I wasn't even going to wade into that pool. It's just like, y'all need to get it cleaned up. That's y'all's problem. And I just wanted to live. I told them, look, I'm not trying to interfere with how y'all live, but y'all keep y'all's problems over there across the street. Do not bring it over here. Don't be making trouble for somebody that's trying to help you. I didn't have any business helping them, because I was just about alone by myself. I had a spouse, and my spouse ended up being a bad person, and she left me in a pickle. Within 18 months after she died, my loan ended up being sold to a predatory servicer, and they manufactured a default, and I just felt overwhelmed. I was dealing with that. I got sick right after she died, very, very physically sick, stressed to the point I developed severe asthma, and I had mononucleosis. And I couldn't get any medical assistance. I couldn't get any legal assistance as a single parent at that time. This was many years ago. And I was completely overwhelmed. I was bedridden for the better part of a couple of years, on and off. And I get up to do what I could, but I lost the capacity to work for a while. And amid all that, the local government, for a long while, they stonewalled me until I started writing to higher offices about what was happening out there. I didn't know specifically which local office commissioner to speak to. I didn't know about the districts. Didn't know anything about politics. And I ended up losing my home. My house ended up going to foreclosure after sitting there vacant, torn up for 3 years after that hurricane. I hung on for 2 years after she died, with them refusing to accept my payments and sending me, missed payment notices and just tacking on junk fees and certified mailing fees. And they had me served in the 3rd month after I moved out of the house. I was all the way out in Nacogdoches staying in the hotel. And I'm like, how did you figure out which room I was staying in? How did you even get that information? I mean, I can understand, how they might, like if they had a warrant or something, but a civil process server shows up and knocks on my door to serve me those papers. And I was a special victim, and so was my eldest son. You can see the scars on my face. My wife was responsible for that. I couldn't even remember what had happened to me. And nothing got better until I got out of that area. I couldn't improve anything. The government took years to come in after I started making them aware of all these concerns. And they are investing finally, but it's too late for me. I mean, I lost my whole investment. I won't recover for 10 to 20 years or more if I ever do. I wanted to make a difference, though. I did make a difference, but it came at such a great price to myself, and it seems like it's how it always is when you're a person that tries to make a difference. But they tried to repeatedly mischaracterize me and file false reports against me to law enforcement and social services. And it's such a terrible thing being such a great person, helping people, trying to make a difference, being out there physically laboring for hundreds of hours or thousands of hours. And then you have these jerks who are, they're really just, a lot of them are just criminals. And they try to blacklist you, and they try to smear you to everyone. And you are only trying to see things get better, so that everybody can enjoy a better quality of life, a better condition of existence, not having to wade through flood water to get into their neighborhood, or park outside the neighborhood and walk through water that's, between ankle and knee deep to get to your home on your property, out in the swamp. Because that's what it was. It was a swamp. With everybody using septic systems, the soil condition was real wet out there all the time. And people would dump their waste on their lots. They'd dump, raw sewage outside in a pond next to their property or behind their property. And it was an extremely poor area. Just imagine having to walk through water that is laced with sewage and has large, cottonmouth water moccasins swimming through it in order to get to your home whenever there's any kind of rain, any amount of rain. So they had to come out there, they dredged those ditches, and they replaced all the damaged culverts in the neighborhood. That's what the county had to do, before we left. And I just got crushed by it. I'll never get over it. It's so heartbreaking. I haven't been there in 5 years now, a little over 5 years, and when I tell you the economic fallout from that is catastrophic, I mean, you don't get over that. That's not something you move off from easily. I lost a fortune. when you're earning at the entry level, to lose that kind of money is such a setback. You know, it might set you back a quarter of your life to try to come back from that. You know, if you ever do. And the economy is terrible, and I tell them, you know, y'all need to do more. Y'all need to help people who are out there. Y'all need to help people who are crime victims in that area, because when you're a crime victim as an individual, you don't have family to come in and help you. You stay down sometimes, and you don't come back up from that for a long while, if you ever do. If you survive what happened to you. And between surviving domestic violence and sexual assault, and then having that burglary, and, you know, threats of retaliation if I came back, I said, I can't do it. You know, the police said, well, we can't maintain a standing presence in a property you don't live at to protect the property. And I said, you're not going to arrest the people who are responsible anyway. Their goal was to run us out. And they did that. Through false reporting, they did that. They succeeded. And we were already being falsely reported on, you know, by my mother-in-law, who was also a criminal, unfortunately. Like some of the other people that I was having to deal with out there, just in a different way. And it was a clusterfuck. I hate to call it that, but that's what it was. And the system, since it's so capitalist driven, they want you to work for everything. When you're getting kicked in your ass left and right by multiple people, you know, like, what are you supposed to do? I sat there and I prayed, and I waited, and I prayed for years. And I finally just had to say, you know what, I can't do it anymore. Thanks for listening. You know, thank you. I don't recommend moving to Fresno, Arcola, Rosharon, or Iowa Colony in Fort Bend County or Brazoria County. Anywhere up and down that stretch of 521, all the way down there, you know, to where the post office is at in Rosharon. I don't recommend it. You got pockets of real bad poverty and crime there, and it's just unmanageable. You can't change people. The only thing that changes the area is a lot of outside investment. You gotta get the police in there, have them ramp up patrols and keep it permanent. You know, get more lighting in, get surveillance into the community. That's one of the other things I asked them about, was getting surveillance out there, long-term surveillance across the whole area to mitigate crime, because there's drug trafficking going on, all kinds of other bad stuff. And it just took them too long.